The hatch came apart in a shower of orange sparks, and I went through it low with my kit already open. The room past the breach was white and humming. A man sat strapped to a reclined chair in the center of it, eyes open, throat marked with a row of fine surgical scars that ran collar to jaw. He didn't flinch at the explosion 6 feet from his head. He didn't make a sound at all. On a terminal beside him, a log was still scrolling, calm green text against the white. Subject 14, Cycle 41, Day 9. Vocalization attempts, 0. Adaptation proceeding within expected parameters. I had been a combat medic for 11 years. I had seen burns, decompression wounds, men with half their chest gone who still found the breath to curse me. I had never seen a man sit through gunfire without trying to speak. "Raise status," Lieutenant Calder said in my ear. "One subject conscious, non-responsive," I said. "Throat's been worked on recently." "Copy, keep moving. We've got 200 more rooms like that one." He wasn't exaggerating by much. We cleared the ward room by room, and each one held a man or woman strapped loose to a chair or cot, alive, aware, silent. Some had the same fresh scarring. Some had scars gone old and pale, years old, the kind that meant whatever had been done to them was finished and permanent. A logging terminal sat in every room, and every terminal said some version of the same sentence in the same calm font, like a man reading a weather report. None had resumed attempting vocalization. Subject shows no distress response to silence. The Havern faculty had been taking colonists off Larkspur Reach for 11 years. We hadn't known that an hour ago. We knew it now because a relief convoy pilot had gone off her filed course chasing a beacon and found this station instead, and because she had the nerve to record 40 seconds of it before she ran. 40 seconds was all Fleet Command needed. I found the records room on the third sweep, Calder and 2 riflemen holding the corridor while I went through the archive terminal with a translation cuff strapped to my wrist. The faculty kept good records. That was the worst part. 206 names, cross-reference to 206 case files, cross-reference to a published paper, published, peer-reviewed, circulated to 40 client systems, on the long-term neurological effects of total vocal deprivation in a tool-using species. The colonists weren't prisoners to the faculty. They were data. The procedure had a name that translated, more or less, as calibration, the same bloodless word stamped on every file. Somewhere in there was a methodology section explaining, without apparent irony, that subjects adapted better when severance was performed gradually over several visits, to avoid panic responses that might compromise the data set. I closed the file. I did not need page 2. "Command, this is Rays," I said. "I've got the full subject manifest. 206 names, 11 years of intake. This wasn't an accident and it wasn't a one-time thing. It's a program." There was a pause on the channel that told me more than words would have. Then Calder's voice, flatter than before. "Copy that. Pull what you can carry. We're not leaving anyone behind, conscious or not." What I didn't know yet, and didn't learn until the debrief weeks later, was that Fleet Command hadn't waited for my manifest to act. The convoy pilot's 40 seconds had been enough on its own. A fleet designation had been issued within the hour, a staging order an hour after that. 390 hulls pulled off picket duty and training rotations across 4 systems, and pointed at Corville before our boarding cutters had finished their final approach burn. Our breach and the fleet's launch were the same operation, run in parallel, because by the time anyone with the authority to send us in had seen that recording, there was nothing left to deliberate. The boarding party existed to save who could still be saved. The fleet existed for everything else. We worked fast after that. Not frantic fast. There's a difference, and I'd learned it the hard way over a long career. Frantic gets people killed, fast gets the job done. We moved through the ward in pairs, cutting restraints, lifting the ones who couldn't walk, walking the ones who could, none of them speaking, all of them watching us with eyes that had stopped expecting anyone to come. A faculty administrator met us in the connecting corridor with 3 armed handlers behind him, hands raised in the gesture his species used for parley. He spoke through a translator clipped to his collar, calm, almost bored, the way you'd address an inspector who'd shown up without an appointment. "This facility operates under a registered research charter," he said. "Your intervention is unauthorized and will be noted in our—" Calder shot the lead handler before the administrator finished the sentence, and the other two went down a half-second later. The administrator didn't run. I don't think it occurred to him that running was a category of response available to him. He stood there working his mouth, looking for the next clause of his sentence, and Calder put a hand flat on his chest and pushed him back against the wall, not hard, just final. "You don't get a note," Calder said. "You get an answer." I checked my chrono out of old habit, the way you check a wound to see if it's still bleeding. 6 hours and 40 minutes since the convoy pilot's recording had hit Fleet Command. I didn't know yet what that number meant. None of us did, not really, not the way numbers mean something once you've watched the clock run all the way out. We kept moving subjects to the cutters. The girl I carried out myself couldn't have been past 20, the scarring on her throat still pink, fresh enough that it must have been done in the last cycle, days, maybe hours. Her file, when I found it later among the ones I'd copied, named her Mara Quill, intake from Larkspur Reach, processed as Subject 14. She held onto my collar the whole way to the cutter bay with a grip that didn't loosen even after I had her strapped into a crash seat, and she watched the corridor behind us the entire time, waiting, I understood later, for someone to take it back. Nobody did. At 8 hours 50 minutes, every screen on the Annex's command deck lit at once with the same image. Open space outside the station, and that space no longer empty. They didn't transmit anything first. There was no ultimatum, no recorded warning, no count of ships read out over an open channel for the faculty to argue with. The fleet designated the Severance simply arrived, 390 hulls translating into the system, in a formation that took up more of the sky than the gas giant the station orbited, and it began doing what it had crossed the dark to do before the administrator's body had finished cooling on the deck behind me. I watched it through a cutter viewport with Mara Quill's hand still locked around 2 of my fingers. The faculty's 2 escort cruisers fired everything they had in the first 90 seconds, every weapon system spending itself against shields that didn't register the hits as anything worth a course correction. Then the cruisers stopped firing, because there was nothing left of them to fire with. The fleet didn't pursue the survivors who broke and ran in support craft toward the system's edge. It let them go. It hadn't come for the ones who could still run. It had come for the building behind us, and for the methodology section I hadn't needed to read past, and within 4 minutes of arrival, the Vanter Cognition Annex stopped being a structure with rooms in it and became debris with a slow tumble. The white-lit ward I'd breached an hour earlier now opened to vacuum, and burning off its own atmosphere in a long, bright thread that the gas giant's reflected light turned briefly gold. No terms had been sent. None were sent after either. The Severance held position over Larkspur Reach for 6 days, while every remaining faculty asset in the system was located and ended, methodically, by units that never raised their voices on the comm net once. A second research annex, smaller, hidden in the ring debris of the system's outer moon, was found on day 3 by a routine sweep pattern, not because anyone suspected it was there, but because the sweep pattern didn't allow for a corner of the system to go unchecked. It held 11 more names that hadn't made it onto the manifest I'd pulled. They came home too. Then the fleet left the way it had come, without explanation, because by then none was owed and none was asked for. Mara Quill spoke 9 days later, on the medical transport home, 3 words into the quiet of a recovery ward where I happened to be checking her vitals. I won't put them down here. They weren't for a report, and she didn't say them to me, not really. She said them to the dark outside the viewport, like she was answering something that had been waiting a long time to hear back. I wrote it in my log anyway, in the line reserved for outcome, not adaptation proceeding within expected parameters. Just the truth, The only entry the faculty's calm green font never once managed in 11 years. She spoke. We didn't send the Havern faculty a final word. We let the silence after the severance stand as the only one they'd get, and somewhere out past Corville, in whatever archive they kept now of the system they used to study, that silence is the last entry in the file.